members that we're announcing tonight that have already been approved by
Dr. T. Yeah. I don't know.
they're not, okay, so they're not going to be up here now. They're in the.
No, we're going to have a section where we introduce them, and they could get up.
That's fine.
And yeah, they'll introduce themselves. Okay, once again, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming out to the Wordsmith Restoration Advisory Board. And so my name is Malcolm McClendon. I am going to be facilitating tonight's meeting, and I'll be helped with Brianne Humphreys. She'll be taking minutes. So today marks my 1-year anniversary of being a facilitator. I haven't been fired yet, so I think I'm maybe doing something good, but it's been a good learning experience for me. So anyway, let's go ahead and get going. Do we want to do introductions around the table, or are we good with just?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
You want to do? Okay. If we could start with Denise, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll go around the table, please.
Aaron Weed, Ascota Township Supervisor.
Kathy Woosterbarth, community member.
Robert Tazier, community member.
Catherine Larrabee, community member.
Bill Gaines, community member.
Anila Ridge, community co-chair.
Matt Mars, Air Force Bragg.
Beth Place, Eagle Project Manager.
Mike Munson, Ascota Wordsmith Airport Authority representative.
Jerry Schmidt, a community member.
Jeff Moss, DeSable Township.
Hey, good evening. My name is Clint Emerson. I'm the District Ranger for the Huron Shores Ranger District of the Huron-Manistee National Forest.
And Daniel Stock, community member.
Okay, thank you. And I'd also like to recognize Mr. Eric Keller, who's here with Senator Peters' office, and Mr. Jacob Bennett with Congressman Kilby's office. Anybody else that in the audience that I might have not recognized, or okay. So here's the agenda. We're going to go ahead and move on to the. Just a quick reminder before we move on. We do have a public comment sign-in sheet in the back, along with the cards to fill out. So at the end of the RAB meeting, we're going to allow you 3 minutes to go ahead and comment. Please fill those out, put your name on the sheet, and then turn them into either myself or to Brianne in the back during the break. That way we get your comments, and we call you up when it's time. Also, and also sign in. So, all right. Here's the RAB. These are just the ground rules. Have a quick look, and okay, before we get into the stakeholder updates, I want to turn it over to the co-chairs to see if they have any words.
Okay, I'll start it off, and basically this is 911, so I'd like to take a moment of silence for everyone to remember that. And I'd like to take a moment to thank all the veterans. that was really nice this morning. When I drove on to the installation, the former installation, they were having a nice ceremony. So, and at that, I'll turn it over to Arnie.
Thanks, Matt. I want to thank the community RAB members that, since the last RAB meeting, we've had, I think, 4 work sessions. Bill, he's my go-to guy on these work sessions because they're internal and they're in addition to what you see on these quarterly meetings. So I want to thank the community RAB members for putting up a little bit more effort and digging into some of the details so that we can bring more information and push the agencies and work with the agencies to get better remediation and more actions. So thank you. Contact these guys. Let them hear from you because we need that.
Okay, thank you. And we're going to move on to our stakeholder updates. We'll start with the Air Force.
Okay.
Mr. Matt.
Since we met the last time, and apologize, it's been a while since we met, but our contractor Wood completed their 4th quarter drinking water monitoring, and I'll scoot on over and give a high point. Basically, the Mission Street project has been awarded. They are already over there working. It's the same group that did the central treatment system build. It's a Corps of Engineer project. Omaha Corps is a service agent on that. And we talked to them this morning, and it is anticipated it will be up and running in December. This will be a 200 gallon per minute resin treatment system. So that's good news there. And right now they're doing some work at SS 57. That's our Bay West contractor. And right now the expanded SI Wood is in the process of putting that draft report together. And we have a timeline on that, which we have in conjunction with Eagle, sort of went down through it. We'll discuss some more in a little bit on it. But with that, they completed the field work with 83 samples. And then the upcoming, just going down through there, we should have a draft feasibility study for landfill 3031 coming up. And like I said, the ESI report, we hope to have a draft on it this fall and have it to Eagle in December. So.
Matt.
I'm looking at the first slide. Which, moving on to slide number 6. Sorry about that. I had my mind on other things. And with that being said, I might as well, I've talked to a lot of you guys already, but sort of let you know, this is my last RAB meeting. And I've talked to you a lot. I've got a son who's a combat disabled vet, and he has a construction company, so I'm retiring and going to go to work for him. So I'll get to be around my son and my best friend and help raise my granddaughters. So I'm retiring at the end of this month. So it's been a pleasure working with all of you. Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, back to business now. On the Mission Street, the pumping tree, like I said earlier, that's been awarded. That's with the same contractor, and that will be a standalone 200 gallon per minute treatment capacity system. It will be incorporating a resin versus GAC. So it'll be interesting to see how different treatment technologies work. And we're retrofitting the old Mission building. And they're working on that right now. They've cleaned out the 2 old air strippers on that as we move along. And so it will discharge into the current storm drainage system, and we'll be working with the township on that as we move forward. So, and as I said, it is a 200 gallon per minute treatment system, and the O&M on that, we hope to see a change out on that resin. They're estimating 2.4 years versus the carbon, the GAC change out, which is probably between 100 to 120 days. So it's more expensive with the resin versus the carbon, but it'll be interesting to see with the Mission Street system. And this will be expedited as much as we can to get it up, because I told the contractor, I said, we've got to get it in by Christmas. He said, I think we'll beat that. So let's keep our fingers crossed on that as we move forward. So, and also at the same time, part of this project over at the central treatment system, we are putting in a green sand filter. Because the benzene plant, there was some things that were sort of stopping that one up and causing them to have to back flush the CTS. So by putting in the green sand filter, I think that will help there. And that's good to put it in over the bigger building at the CTS. And then moving on to the next slide, that's just sort of showing a schematic of what the resin system will look at. Slide 7. And, you know, moving on to the next one, just showing that the project was awarded and the fabrication and everything's being assembled. And right now in September, the disassembly, the piping, everything, the air strippers are gonna fix the roof. So they're gonna repurpose that building, which is a good thing, to repurpose that. It's a nice brick building. And then starting October, in just a couple of weeks, they'll begin the resin system installation, and December. So let's hope that they hold to that 9 December that they put down there. Okay, thanks.
The rest of the stakeholder updates, so if you guys keep it at about 3 minutes, make sure that everybody else gets time to have their updates. Sir?
Sure. So the Forest Service is committed to working with the Air Force to focus, the entire focus for us is on Clark's Marsh, which if anybody doesn't realize is national forest land, is public land. So, and it's also a highly contaminated area. And so we've been focused on that. We've received recently a research permit request, working with some folks with DNR, kind of are putting that forward, and we did permit that research, and I actually went out and met with those folks out at Clark's Marsh and you know, kind of observed what they were doing and interacted with them about the sampling approach. As we move forward, we're you know, looking at finishing up. We've kind of focused our area there, and I think I mentioned last time we were working on a PASI, basically a preliminary assessment site inspection, and that has now concluded. And that is something that you know, if you're interested in learning more about that kind of stuff, our office is right down the road here. I think most people know where we're at. And stop by, and we're, you know, like I said, looking to partner with the Forest Service and move this process forward, and we're particularly focused on Clark's Marsh and what's happening out there and how that could affect the Asaba River.
Okay, thank you. Eagle?
I am Beth Place again with Eagle Remediation and Redevelopment, and I'm the project manager for Worksmith. So for us, we have been focusing on having some listening sessions with local members of the community recently, so we have this Friday, we have scheduled listening sessions with Osable Township, as well as now Need Our Water Group. So we're looking forward to that and gaining perspectives. Also in August, Representative Aller was here, and she had a tour of the Oscoda area with Oscoda Township and some other community members. And Director Clark from EGLE also attended those tours, and so we gained some valuable perspectives, and it's always good to know what members of the community are thinking. Okay. We also had AG Nestle. They organized a tour of the central treatment system and the future location of the Mission plant system also in August. And so I know that AG Nestle also met with Osable Township, Oscoda Township, and OWA during that time frame. Okay. We're also, as far as reports go, and this isn't in here, but we are currently reviewing some of the reports that Matt earlier mentioned. So the LF 3031 feasibility study, we'll be getting our reports back, our comments back to the Air Force next week, early next week. We also have, for Water Resources Division, they recently completed an inspection of the central treatment system, the Mission treatment system, and FTO2. And I know they collected samples during that time frame, and those results are currently pending from the inspection. And Charlie Bauer and Matt Seiler are here in the audience, and they're closely affiliated with that if anyone has any questions. Also from Water Resources Division, Joe Borer has been conducting fish sampling in the area, and he'll be conducting them in Van Etten Lake and Cedar Lake, I believe, in the month of September. Okay. All right. And then, Mike, did you want to provide the district update, or or if you'd like me to? Okay.
First of all, just like Matt, this is sort of my final meeting also. I'm going to be moving on to do additional work, PFAS work statewide with Empire. I'll still be working on the Bay City office, so if things happen, I'll be around to help the new staff. So I'd like, Andy, could you stand up? Andy Hart will be working on the projects that I was working on, taking over for me. And then Mandy, could you stand up? Amanda Armbruster is the geologist for the district and has Iosco County and does the geology and also does project management in the county. And then she also works with the Oscoda Township dump. The other update would be for the district is that we will be sampling what we call the GSU wells throughout the area. Those are on Loud Drive, over on Colbath, over by Oscoda Schools. We'll be starting that. That'll be a 2-year project, sampling those wells quarterly. We also will be doing some work on wells that we have in Osable Township. We have a couple hot spots in Osable Township that we will be sampling, and we'll talk to Osable Township on Friday, and we'll give you a good update on that and let you know exactly where we'll be at and what we'll be doing. So with that also, we'll be doing other work. We have some work that we would like to do in Cedar Lake, in the Cedar Lake area, and so we'll be working on that also. So that's the district update. Thank you, Beth, for asking.
Thanks, Mike.
Hey, Beth.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Mike Jury.
How do you spell his last name?
Jury.
I should know that.
Okay. Okay. And then I know we have the MDNR update up here, Tammy Newcomb, but she'll be briefing with DHHS, if that's all right. Okay.
Okay, thank you. On to the community RAB members update.
Hi, my name's Kathy Boosterbarth. I'm a member of the Now Need Our Water Group. And we took the opportunity today during the RAB meeting to invite some other areas in Michigan to the meeting so that they can get an idea of what we're struggling with and link with them. And so I'd like for those people to stand for me. Sandy Wint-Stelp from Belmont. Arthur Woodson from Flint. Tony Spaniola. Craig Miner, a former veteran at Wordsmith Air Force Base. David Smith from Grayling. He's on their new RAB board. And then we have 2 members from Alpena that came to visit and support us. So I wanted to take this opportunity to let you know that we have been living with toxic PFAS contamination for years, and with nearby waterways, and as well as our groundwater. According to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, surface water in our community has been found to have a hazard quotient of 38 times the recommended level of 1 for children. The fish in the Asable River, which people rely on and have always eaten, are some of the most highly contaminated in the world. And consumption alone has likely resulted in dangerously high PFAS blood levels in Oscoda area residents. We know these chemicals are dangerous, and we know their origin, the former Wordsmith Air Force Base. And contamination flows directly and continuously, uninterrupted, into nearby Lake Huron. Frankly, the government's response, or lack of, to this water contamination has been intolerable. Over the 9 years has passed since the discovery of these toxic chemicals in our water, yet the federal government has failed to put any real plan in place to clear up the contamination and protect our water. My friends and families are developing and dying of kidney, liver, and testicular cancers. They are also suffering from immunological diseases, increased cholesterol, thyroid diseases, among other possible related disorders. Unexplainably, the Air Force has not even committed to a timeline for coming up with a plan, even though they are ongoing threats to public health. With the Air Force here tonight, we are here to tell you that this injustice cannot continue. We are demanding that the Air Force take action and stop the bleeding of PFAS now. The Air Force must immediately clean up the plumes impacting our public beach, our state campground, youth camp, and our groundwater. It is also time for the federal government to help the impacted people by doing health outreach, evaluations of local citizens, veterans, and their families. We have suffered from this contamination for far too long, and the federal government has deceived, delayed, and failed to provide real solutions to this problem. The only answers we've gotten from the Air Force is that further investigations need to be done, but we already have the information we need. Our community is being poisoned by these contaminants. The time for action is now. Thank you for the opportunity to tell you that Oscoda will not be silenced. We will not be minimized, and we will not be forgotten. Continued inaction is unconscionable.
Any other community member updates?
Since the last RAB meeting, the community RAB has done, try to connect with other RABs and also other agencies that are responsible to identify how PFAS is affecting us and what the Air Force should be doing in relation to cleaning up and remediating. So we've attended 2 lobbying days in Congress by invite, and we've talked to over 20 congressionals to pass these bills that Congress has drafted to make PFAS, PFOS, at least the start, as hazardous substances, because that's holding the Air Force back, to put more money into their budget so that they will be able to comply with CERCLA and start remediating, taking real actions. We've also attended the conference, the national conference on PFAS in Boston, and talked to ATSTR and the National Institute of Health experts about where the real numbers should be to protect our health, because those maximum contamination levels that are being discussed by Michigan, those will ultimately set cleanup standards for the Air Force. So it's critical that we all be ready to review those standards when they come out in October. And the Air Force, I challenge you to review and comment on them at the same time, so there's no delays. We've attended Grayling, their contamination site, to find out what they're doing. It's the Army National Guard. The state actually, because they're part of the responsible party, is actually funding a pilot, and that's called Plume Stop. It's very successful. They're just completing their 1 year, and I've asked the state Empire to look into finding the funding to do the same thing here. We've looked at the MCLs, maximum contamination levels that are being drafted by the Eagle, and we're particularly concerned about the hexane sulfonate one because it's 51 parts per trillion and the New Hampshire passed 18. So we made comments to the science advisory on that. Transparency and comment and communications needs improvements by all agencies and us to them. We need to work more together to know what different agencies are doing before they take an action. We ought to be able to influence actions, and that's something that the RAB is meant to do. If you look, we're challenged to do that. We can't do it without information. To that point, we have found out in the last 4 months that we have not been getting reports from the Air Force and Eagle 2 years now, 17 and 18. I cannot tell you what contamination is leaving the storm sewer before the GAC unit went online. It was 1,000 parts per trillion of PFAS 2016, and the 17 report hasn't been released. That's not right. And we need a schedule so that if the agencies can't review in time and pass on a final, then we get the draft, the best information. We deserve that here. We want a schedule for this ESI that's coming out in December. We want a schedule up front on when the Eagle and the Air Force is going to share that with the RAB. We should be getting a draft at some point in their review so that we could review it in a couple of months and then bring it to you, the public. And the last one thing we found out is the Air Force was not asking for the extra congressional money that was made available by Congress in the last defense 2 years. And they proved it by sending a letter to our senators. And they even took an unfunded $4.5 million for a project here so it could go to other bases. That's not right. They should at least tell us that they're doing that, and that's not happening. And as far as the deer sampling that's gone on, only 1 deer was sampled in Clark's Marsh. That's not enough to prove how bad the contamination is there to contaminate our deer. And those deer can leave the advisory area. So I challenge the Eagle to come up with a CERCLA remediation-based study so that the Air Force can be pushed to do an ecological risk assessment now, just like they started in New Hampshire 2 years ago. And if they don't, hopefully the Forest Service and Fish and Wildlife will, because we can't have hunters putting contaminated deer in their freezers for the winter and eating it. Thank you.
Sir, any more community member updates? Nope. Okay. Move on to Al Sabo.
We're going to be meeting with Eagle on Friday. We appreciate that meeting. We're looking for surface water data. We understand that there's some surface water testing going on at the mouth and at Mill Street. But we don't have plumes of contaminants going into the river at the mouth or at Mill Street. We have it going in at Van Etten Creek. We have it going in at 3 pipes. We have it coming in from Clark's Marsh. So we're very interested in finding out what your plan is to determine how we can correct surface water and further testing in Asabo Township. And that's the basis of our meeting. So I'm hoping that we're coming with what Mike had said, some results of what's going on and some actions that we're going to be taking. We need to see some actions over here. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The airport?
Yes, I'm Mike Munson, and I'd just like to give a status update and a thank you to the Air Force. Airport business activity is going well. Workforce numbers are strong. But any improvement that we make to the airport needs to have environmental impact studies, and those are a significant expense. We were able to obtain a brownfield redevelopment grant to address these costs. That is completed, and I'd like to thank the Air Force for letting us use the existing wells to be able to basically sample the stuff we needed to sample. Saved us a significant amount of money because we didn't have to drill our own wells. With that, if there are any other questions about the airport, I'd be more than happy to address those after the meeting.
Thank you. Let's go to Township.
Phase 1 water main extension has been completed. That's Van Etten Dam Road, Forest Lane, or Forest Drive. We're working on getting things settled for the Phase 2 water main extension, which goes up Loud Avenue. There have been significant cost increases in construction costs, and that has created a shortfall in funds, so we're trying to remedy that so that we can complete the project to the length that we've originally wanted it to go without having to cut it short. So we're working diligently on that aspect of things. We're also waiting from the state to hear what kind of funds they can provide to us for the Phase 3 water main project or more. I asked the state for the entire $8 million needed to complete the entire area of concern. I doubt that we would get that much, but hopefully we will get a good enough amount. We've not heard back from ECWAG yet as to whether they are going to be able to provide us funds, and if so, how much that would be. We've heard talks that they want to increase the limits again so that more funds would be available to complete bigger projects. But again, that's up in the air. So there's a lot of things we won't know for the future projects, probably for another few months. As far as the Air Force goes, Assistant Secretary of the Air Force Henderson was here a few months ago. Spent 15 minutes during a meeting discussing how much the Air Force has done for the area, how much they've worked for the community, how much communication is important, and on and on and on. As soon as he got done, I expressed to him, that's a very beautiful picture that you painted. However, the Air Force actions have been very different. And I went down the list of the actions. I hope that the Air Force actions will improve, but what I've heard from their attorneys sounds like they are still extremely reluctant to put the resources into this project that really need to be there. They had an original plan. I don't know what happened with it, with the extraction field that was to go down F41 in 2017, and then they got changed to old infrastructure. What concerns me is using this old infrastructure is not designed to handle the PFAS plumes, which have been allowed to perpetuate so far for so long. I want to know when new infrastructure is going to be put in from both the Air Force and from Eagle in order to encompass this to stop, as Ms. Wuzerbar said, the bleeding into our surface waters. I want to know if the Air Force had asked for the additional funds needed for 2020 in order to remedy this beyond the Mission Street plant, which again is old infrastructure rather than you putting in new infrastructure to handle the contamination that goes for square miles beyond the old infrastructure. I'd like to know the PFHXS levels that are coming into the Mission Street plant and what they will be coming out. PFHXS is my biggest concern in this since it has the longest half-life.
And those will be captured so we can follow forward on
Thank
those
you.
in the Q&As. So, yes.
Thank you. MDHHS.
MDHHS is working with DNR to finalize a permanent deer sign. It's going to be finalized very soon. And on another point, we are also working with another health advisory for wildlife from the Clark's Marsh, and we are putting a memo together, and that memo is going under review. And then when that memo is finalized, we'll share that with the RAB members. And time is going to add on the remaining points.
Coming from the peanut gallery back there. Good afternoon, folks. My name is Tammy Newcomb. I'm the Senior Water Policy Advisor for the Department of Natural Resources. And I just want to say it's nice to meet you, Clint. The first thing that I want to do tonight is thank Clint in his new role. We've had some ongoing communication and conversations about testing and different types of analytical work that we could do in Clark's Marsh, and they've been a full partner on board, including welcoming the students from Bowling Green there. So Ivy talked about the map boundaries that will be changed. It's giving me a lot of feedback. Are we okay now? Yep. Okay. Abhi was talking about the map boundaries issue that we had that we're bringing forward. A little bit more complicated for people to understand, but it's more precise in that we're using section boundaries, which collapses particularly to the south, that 5-mile radius. In the beginning, we were told folks needed the roads, so we're modifying that this year for the Do Not Eat advisory. So Abhi talked about that. That should be out hopefully later this week. We've gone through all the checks. Abhi also talked about the Clark's Marsh concerns related to folks maybe harvesting muskrat or turtles out of the marsh, and it's probably just a good idea not to eat turtles or muskrats out of Clark's Marsh. So DHHS is putting together that information. Number 3, I want to talk about deer. So Arnie talked about only 1 deer came out of the middle of Clark's Marsh. We took 20 deer from around the area last year. Most of them were within 3 miles of Clark's Marsh, which our wildlife biologists told us there was a high probability that deer within that range would have had contact with the water in Clark's Marsh. So we did get that 1 high deer. There were only 2 other deer that had any detectable level of PFAS in their muscle. It was very, very low amounts. DHHS did not need to put a consumption advisory for the low amounts. It was just the 1 deer, lucky deer number, sample number 13, I kid you not, that had PFAS levels in it that were the 547 parts per billion, and 300 is the do not eat action levels. So what we are doing this year is working with folks. I've asked the local DNR staff to work with folks in the community for this fall to increase the sample sizes to understand what, if there are other potential levels in the muscle, because all the other animals, 17 animals, were no detect in the muscle. Slight detections in the liver and the kidney, but no detect in the muscle. So we are working with local folks in the area this fall to get up to 50 samples. There will be some agreements with those folks in terms of, they need to understand we probably won't get the results back for 3 months, so they can either dispose of the deer in a place we have them do it and get a tag to go hunt someplace else, or they can hang on to the deer till they get the results back. But we're working out those details right now. So local staff are working with local people to get some additional samples, because DHHS has told us that if we can get more negatives, the non-detects, then that will help us in terms of the advisory and understanding the advisory. That's phase 1. Phase 2, we're going to go in the spring, right into the Clark's Marsh area to do some targeted assessment of deer from as many as we can get within that Clark's Marsh area. APHIS guys did the hunt for us in April, the year that we did this. They're very good professionals at what they do. If they would have been able to get more than one deer in the very short amount of time that they had in there, they would have. So we're going to ask them to focus. This will be next spring when we go in and do that. We'll have all the information then compiled for DHHS to take into consideration for deer hunting then the following year in this area. We already talked about Bowling Green. DNR had some money put towards it to do some ecological work in Clark's Marsh, because right now there's a huge void of understanding how PFAS circulates within the food web, within the ecosystem, in the algae, in the sediment, in the little snails, in the zooplankton, in the fish, and on up. Very little evidence or understanding. And Clark's Marsh is the place where we can really get some solid understanding in that. So we issued a request for proposals. It went out to over 300 different investigators. Purdue University was the successful bidder of that. And I hope at some point they can come back and talk to you about what they're doing, because they're looking at doing an ecological risk assessment for the aquatic biota in Clark's Marsh. So we are very excited to be working with them and hoping that that will give us some more information. One of the things that this will do is help us lay a baseline for the amount of the levels that are in the different biota and allow us to model into the future. If we understand the transfer rates, we could, if the contamination flow is turned off, then we could model into the future what it would look like for levels in the future. And I know I went over my 1 minute. I apologize, but thank you for letting me talk.
Okay, thank you.
I have brought up the map with me, so you can take a look at during the break time and let me know if you have any comments. Thank you.
Okay, D2.
I will be in Lansing next week with new rules and working with Eagle and finding out what the drafts are for that, what kind of feedback. I will bring the comments from the RAB meeting as well. Sue Manente has reached out to our medical director, Dr. Hamed, to be part of the standardized physician education training that really is necessary for physicians to be able to counsel and evaluate individuals with exposures to PFAS. I think behavioral health, isn't really mentioned very much, but the trauma to people for an environmental contamination and the thought of having the contamination that's bioaccumulating and what that may mean. I do think there's some really good training for different social workers that are happening, but I can't overemphasize enough the need to really meet people's the anxiety around all the unknowns of this contamination. And time is against us. It is imperative that we have action to eliminate the risk to our community. And this is a social injustice, so it's a people problem with water, as well as an environmental issue. We have a duty to leave this natural resource of water and wildlife better than where we're at. And that's going to take the Department of Defense and the federal agencies to take lead, and that money, I think, is crucial to keep the movement going forward. And when I listen to our community members, if this is a sixth health advisory coming into our area, how many is it going to take? And what needs to happen for the action to start so that people feel you're on the right side of the issue? We implore the Air Force to take steps to eliminate the contamination and help us with our infrastructure and our family needs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We are, okay, we're going to move on to the presentations. We are a little bit behind schedule, but I think everybody has some good stuff to share, so I think that's good to give it a little extra time to that. So going to go ahead and move on. If I could ask everybody, and there's a lot of questions, a lot of stuff to be presented. We'll hold until the end of the meeting, that's just for time and for
Just go started down through the timeline on the dispute resolution, starting with the 14th of December back in 2017. What started it with the 7 items and moving on down through that and just started jumping to we met with Eagle following the last RAB meeting the very next day in Lansing. So we met there when we had the applicable parties. At the time it was Sue Lemming and Dr. Termath, because the dispute resolution, because I'll just sort of briefly touch on this. The Air Force gives the state DESMOA funds, and that's funds to expedite reviews and things of that nature. But under the dispute DESMOA, when things of this nature come up, they must follow the dispute resolution process. So that's sort of a little sidetrack of what the reason we have to follow through the dispute. But going down through there, the correspondence, and then the press release, and then the present day ongoing negotiations with basically, we're coming to more of a understanding and agreements as we move forward in this, and more of a collaborative approach, and working to come to agreement on sort of the conceptual path forward on all this. And once again, work together very closely with the state on there. But you can see just moving down through there. And right now, there's things that still ongoing. In each one of the meetings, basically, following a BCT meeting, we have in Lansing, and we have those in Lansing on a very frequent basis. But we will sit and talk with the Eagle staff about, the ongoing status of that. So hopefully more to follow in the future, but it is being discussed at that level. And then moving on to the ESI, the expanded site investigation, which up until recently had been what we'd been calling and briefing on as the SSI. But to be consistent across the Air Force, both active and BRAC, you go with the ESI. And so this, for the most part, the bottom line is to help people understand what needs to be done in the cleanup of this site. And the emphasis of the ESI report will be it'll contain conclusions, of which some of those we already know we'll be moving on to an RI, but at the same time, with the conclusions, there will probably be some discussion on interim response actions. And our contractor's working on that diligently, and we hope to see that as soon as possible. And I'm sure at the next RAB meeting, it will be discussed. Okay. Okay, the next slide. Oh.
You got it.
Yeah. Oh. Nope,
Other way. Okay. Just going down through it, basically where we're at with the ESI, we started the preliminary assessment in 2016, then the SI, as Clint talked about with Forestry Service doing their PA-SI. So, we follow the CERCLA process the whole time. Let me just jump to that slide and sort of show, and this is a slide you may want to keep for a future reference, just following the CERCLA process stages. And showing where we're at right now, and we'll explain that more as we move on. But you see, we have to follow these processes because we take taxpayer dollars to do all these cleanups, so you must follow the whole process. And moving on to the next slide, and going down through it, I think we have the little handout here. And I think this was one of the things which will help with the big maps in front. This identifies all of the 17 sites which were looked at during the SI. And during break, if others that are sitting back there want to come up and look at that, that just goes down through each one of those sites. And what the ESI, it helps to build off the SI data and to develop the conceptual site model. And that's one of the things we're looking at, and it will help us as we get into the RI. And, you know, just breaking it down to date, they pulled more than 360 or 350 samples from over 131 wells. And going down through, there was 79 vertical aquifer sampling locations. And, you know, close to 300 samples were pulled.
Okay, so Eagle also reviews, once the Air Force is done, and they provide us the ESI near the end of December, then Eagle will review that. And in our review, we were going to be focused on the field sampling designs, the sampling collection methods, and analytical methods used. We review this prior to the work and the work plans, and then we review that all those steps were incorporated once we receive that report. The Air Force uses quality checks in the data that they collect while they're out there, and so Eagle also reviews that data for quality once we receive the report and the quality report that goes along with that. And an additional assurance we have is Eagle's collected several samples across the base during the site inspection process and through our own investigations, and so we have a general idea in areas, and we'll be using that data to help us as well. So in general with the ESI, Eagle, we oversee the site investigation and cleanup activities, and that we will ensure the compliance with applicable regulations. Another thing to mention here is that during the BCTs, we have frequent discussions on what will be on the ESI. We're going back and forth on, you know, what will be included. We have frequent telephone calls, and so we're in constant communication because we really want to get this report out to you guys. Okay.
I don't mean to interrupt, but based on the conversations that we had with Mr. Henderson when he was in town, he was saying that these EIS, this is going to take 4 to 6 years to come up with a remediation plan. Is that pretty accurate?
I think whatever Mr. Henderson reported at the 23 April RAB meeting, yes, in those other meetings, I think that was in around the 4 or so year range.
So we're looking at studies now for the next 4 to 6 years based on when they're done, when they're analyzed, when they're looked at, when they're studied, when they're everything. So we're going to continue to have current levels of contaminants going into our surface water and drinking water for the next 4 to 6 years based on this process and the speed in which the state and the Air Force is moving. Is that accurate?
Not to a certain extent. Part of the ESI will also have conclusions which talk about interim measures. And I think that's one of the things that you're really intent upon, both the townships. So, and that's what we'll get to in the next slide or two. And I think that will help to address some of your
I guess
questions.
The length of time is the issue that the communities have to impact the state and the Air Force, that we're looking for something a little stronger than a 4 to 6 year timeline to come up with some action.
What Secretary Henderson, when he said 4 years, I never heard him say 6, but maybe he did, is for the whole base, the whole site, to be the
That's not
remediation invasion,
Which the,
RI stage is started, so the designs.
You weren't in the meeting, and I don't mean to disrespect
Well, I wasn't
you.
invited, and that's why I wasn't
Then,
there.
but you weren't in the meeting, and what he said was it was gonna take 4 years minimum, most likely 6. And then he said it's possible it could take 8. So I'm sitting here saying, we got an issue. And the issue is contaminants are moving in to the water, period. I don't care if you want to talk about drinking water, surface water. These people are sitting here because they are drinking this water, they're swimming in this water, and the state and the Air Force is here to hear what we have to say. And we're telling you, that's too long. We would greatly appreciate a little way to process this so we have a dispute resolution with you guys, that we are gonna have to start taking action against you guys to move this process faster. Because we're drinking it.
I think in the next slides, you address that a little bit.
Okay.
Sorry.
Appreciate your comments.
Sorry.
Okay, moving on to the next slide. Basically, one of the things to talk about with the ESI is looking at the fate and the transport model. And that's, we talk a lot about the groundwater modeling and also the capture zones to ensure emission, aero, and benzene, and evaluate those. Also, the FTO2. And then what you were really sort of alluding to or asking about, Jeff, was evaluate interim response measures. And that's one of the biggies there. And that will be discussed in the ESI. So when that is briefed, and that will be in the December, hopefully it'll still be draft, but we can probably get down to the meat and potatoes on that at that point. But that's really what you're asking for right there as well. As you,
What I'm asking for is that you skip the slow circular process and jump to your interim because you have substantial and exposure to not only the public but also the biology of the area.
we still have to follow the circular process. So
That is a circular process, and for a number of sites. In other words, is it possible that in December, your conclusions could say, you could put 2 GACs, filters or whatever, onto Van Etten plumes and increase the the FTO2 by quadrupling, which the DEQ asked you to do? That is a possibility in the December conclusions.
There is already imminent and substantial
Exactly.
exposure to the people, and therefore you don't have to use this slow circular process. Is the Air Force still going down the lines of sovereign immunity?
that's something just have to
I'm
ask
sure
the
a lot of
attorneys.
this is over your head.
Yeah.
'Cause you're-
agree.
there are other Air Force people who need to be here.
You're getting into the legal realm, Jessica.
Let's,
But a
we
good
can move forward,
question, it'll be
please.
captured and address it. So basically, the ESI, and going to the next slide, and why the ESI, just a further evaluation of the drinking water priority areas and the potential impacts to those drinking water sources. And as we move forward, we have to have that process, because right now within the Air Force there's around 181 Air Force sites that are moving or that need an RI. And it must be, with limited funds, you have to look at the relative risk and for the sequencing, which is getting the funds to that. And yes, Wordsmith is very high on that list, no doubt, as we move forward.
It's high on the list?
Yes.
Over the last 4 years, it's been high on the list? We used to be number 2 until Pease blew up in your face, Air Force face, in 2015, 14, 15. We haven't been number 2 on your BRAC list since then. So I'm hoping your managers are saying something different than we've seen in actual implementation. So I hope your managers will come to the next meeting and brief that.
Okay.
Up to, I would suggest, a term math level at least, or when Henderson is here. Yeah.
Yes, and hopefully they will be here for the opening of the Mission Street. But sort of some of the things that are looked at in the remedial investigation, and then those that are covered in the expanded site inspection. And some of those overlap, which, as I discussed earlier, the conceptual site model, the updated groundwater modeling, which they are doing now, and also the transducer study, which has been being worked both with the Air Force and with Eagle contractors, have been working on the transducer study along Van Etten Lake, and then evaluating the capture zones as they move forward. The things that the ESI will not do are those last three items: risk assessments, and evaluate the cleanup levels, and determine the need for remedial action. So, but from the ESI, there will be the conclusions that get into those items. And like I said, I hope to have that in December and have that discussed, I'm sure, in detail at the next RAB. Moving on to the next slide. Just on the report development, it was started, they finished up the sampling back in June. Right now, our contractor, used to be AMEC Wood, now they go by Wood, is putting the report together. Hope to see that an initial draft to the Air Force, hopefully in the next month or so. So that takes a while to get all that put together, and a lot of that with the CSEM, the conceptual site model, and the groundwater modeling, that takes quite a bit of time. And then they'll draw in their conclusions and recommendations. Following that, we move on to the Air Force reviews, and it'll go through the internal reviews and all those items during the October time frame. And then once that gets through, then we'll submit the draft on to Eagle. And then at that point, I'll sort of turn that over.
So Eagle's review of the ESI, right now we're estimating the review of the draft is going to take about 60 to 90 days. And we have handed out this timeline, which we'll touch on briefly in a few minutes. But just so you know, Eagle's review will include a technical review, the things we've already mentioned, but it'll be a technical review from our technical staff internally, as well as one of our contractors. We will also have a project management review, and then Eagle Management will also be reviewing this report to make sure that all aspects are covered there.
Okay, and basically with the ESI, the next step, you have the outcomes, and the three possible outcomes. The first one, no further action. We know that will not happen at all. The second one, the interim drinking water response actions, and those have to have sufficient data, which we do have, to press forward with those, and also to proceed with the RI, which has already been committed to for Wordsmith. So, and then the prioritization of the sites, and then it's based upon relative risk and the sequencing of the funding. This will be a fence-to-fence RI. So, and we have, then once you get the funding, then we'll press forward. We have it in as a FY20 project. It will be submitted in that time frame, and we'll just have to see how the funding works out on that. But it is in the top priority, and it has to go still. Once it's submitted on up for the funding, it has to the relative risk site evaluation, scoring and ranking, basically from back in your Air Force days.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yep. So.
Did you ask for the money in 2020? The extra money?
That has, I think there has been their discussion of a plus-up. So hopefully, we'll see in 2020. But once again, like you said earlier, that's probably way beyond my pay grade.
We've heard that from Secretary Henderson, not directly, but passed on from other reps, that he said last month a doubling of the BRAC budget. So 50 to 100 million, so an increase of 50 is a rough, but no guarantees.
Exactly.
So, Matt, before you move on to this one, I don't think, this didn't make it into the presentation. We submitted it a little bit late. But yeah, they're available in the back on the tables. So this is an EGLE projected timeline for when the path of the ESI. So it's just kind of a supplement to what Air Force is going through here in our joint presentation. And so basically we anticipate we'll receive the draft ESI by December from the Air Force. EGLE plans to submit their comments we'll conduct our review, submit our comments by February of 20. And then you can see as the path goes down, these are estimated timeframes. Everyone at Air Force and EGLE is trying to work to get this a final report as quickly as possible. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we do a very thorough job. So again, please pick one of these up or take a look at this. And we also will probably have this on our website before the end of the week. So you can see that the final report is estimated to be May 2020. We hope that it'll be quicker than that. But again, just so you can have kind of an estimated time frame and the input here.
I have a question that comes up from that. You probably don't know the answer, but the prioritization about where the Air Force goes to do this remediation, is any of it based on the populations that's affected? Like we're a very small community with not a lot of people here, where some of the other bases are near very heavily populated areas. Does that come into it?
It is looked at because I'm at Reese out in West Texas. There we've tested close to 500 wells. We've got over 200 drinking water systems in where we're doing GAC and resin. So even though it's a isolated area out by the base, not a whole lot of people, we do have, it is based on the number of exceedances, for the residents, which there we've had to test close to 500 wells. And like I said, probably close to 220 drinking water systems installed at individual homes. So, and at Pease, the other one that is rated right up there real high, you have a lot of exceedances. So at the, individuals.
Can I add an action item at this point, talking about the schedule that EGLE is going to, Air Force gives a report at the end of December. EGLE is going to take 60 to 90 days. I want to put in an action item that we ask you, the two agencies, to think about where the RAB, full RAB, fits in receiving that full report as draft, because we cannot influence decisions, as you've said, that the RAB is designed to do and give you comments if we're only receiving the final report. So I'm asking for that as an action item and get back to us in the next month or so that we can know where we fit and be able to start reviewing and understanding in detail so that we can give you comments.
Okay, I think that's being captured. So we will certainly do that, Arnie.
So that's before, that's roughly around the February 20 timeline, or March, definitely before March, that we receive the full report, in addition to the briefing you're going to give us in December or January.
Hopefully we'll have the next RAB in December at the same time that we have the opening ceremony for the Mission Street system, getting that one online. So we'll talk about that later on.
We can move forward.
Yeah, we need to move forward because moving on to slide number 24, basically just sort of going down through there. with the prioritize the sites, there's close to 40 BRAC installations. And I've mentioned, there's basically 3. Pease, Reese, and Wordsmith right there at the very top that have that pull in the highest risk evaluation. So, but just looking down through it, when they go in the data assemblies, the source, the pathway, and the receptors, the drinking water receptors. And I mentioned Reese just a little bit ago with the extremely high numbers of systems that we put in there. And they look at the evaluation factors when they go down through. And then also the relative risk, high, medium, and low. All this is taken into account, is move forward with the RI. And I think across the Air Force, there's like 189 installations that are needing to move on to RI. So that's across both active and BRAC. So moving on to the next slide, slide 25. You had mentioned, I think earlier, that the Air Force shifted funds planned for IRP projects, drinking water actions, and sampling. And yes, because of the risk, the relative risk and everything. And then also that IRP funds planned for other projects have been diverted, and that word basically should have been deferred, because the example that we talked about was the deferred for landfill 3031. That is not a PFOA or PFAS site.
Predominantly.
No, the highest levels that we've had there for PFOA or PFAS are 14 and 13.4. So, and that was one of the reasons that, and you had said 4.5 million. What we had was roughly around 400,000. And that's the reason we moved on into the focused feasibility study right now. We did not have the funds to move into that. But that still is one of the areas that we do need to get to the stage OPS, because it's still owned by the Air Force.
But the point is, for the audience, is the Air Force didn't have the funds because they didn't ask for it. The Army and Navy, in that Department of Defense response to Congress, senators said the Army and Navy did not have to defer or any of their projects for remediation. The Air Force did. So that's because they didn't ask for any of that extra money that Congress asked for. They let the other 2 branches take it. So it's well above your pay grade. But that's the reality of what the Department of Defense answered to the senators.
And hopefully,
that's why you didn't have the money.
Hopefully there will be a plus up, or as some of them say, an add-on. So that would be great if that does happen sooner than later. Yes, sir. So basically, the funds, when they are deferred, they have to be moved on to the actual PFOA or PFAS sites and where you have your drinking water.
That's the key word, drinking water.
That's
why our Weston
water
plumes,
protection.
Clark's Marsh, wastewater treatment plant plumes going into the Osalba River do not get the same priority, even though there's a health risk, and do not eat the fish. The Air Force is not prioritizing them, so it's something that you all should know.
And so, not to cut you short.
No, I'm done.
Okay, so for the Wordsmith, the transducer study, both Eagle and the Air Force have conducted a joint transducer study around Van Etten Lake, and this is basically to gain an understanding of the PFOA and PFAS contaminants, movement in groundwater, and by doing that, we've looked at the changing water table through time. And so basically, there's a picture of a transducer up there so you can actually see what it looks like. We put these into monitoring wells, and then it continuously logs the data that we're looking at, so the total water pressure, and it's collected at a certain period of time, and then each of our respective consultants goes out, collects this data over a certain time frame, and then either leaves the transducer in there, goes back and does this again. Right now, we're running this study. I believe Wood ran it through August. AECOM is our consultant. We're still looking at some other issues beyond the joint study. So ours are still in there. And the advantage of this joint approach really is that you can get a complete groundwater data set, and you get the value of the peer review. 2 consultants are evaluating this in 2 agencies. Okay. Sorry.
This slide is virtually unreadable. Is it online or available elsewhere?
Yes, sir.
The map, if you can click the map image on the screen, I'm hoping it'll open. Oh no, the operator. You're not going to be able to open that.
No, there's a JPEG on the presentation.
Somebody should be able to open it.
You can click on that and it'll pop up.
Okay, yeah, letting you know, these slides are also on the Wordsmith and Part website right now, and just so you guys will know. Okay.
That's what I really wanted to know.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
Yes,
so,
there.
so they are online and they can be accessed and looked at.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So first, this is Eagle's map, and the different colors of these are well locations up there, and the different colors just signify the time frame that the transducers were left in these wells. So the majority of Eagle's transducers are on the east side of Van Etten Lake and a bit to the south. So we started at the northern portion on this eastern side and moved down over time, if that makes sense. So the red ones are the most recent transducer data that we've been collecting. Okay. So far, our consultant is still reviewing the results. We have a preliminary draft memo, and I've just received in the last week. But our preliminary results are that the transducers do support the USGS model that's been out there in the past. But we're still doing further evaluation, and our consultant will be coming up with a transducer memo, and we'll be sharing that once that's final.
Okay, that'll probably be touched on at the December RAB.
Sure, we can do that.
Okay. Oh.
Well, that last one was yours. And these are the Air Force results.
Okay, yeah, basically our Air Force consultant, the one that's doing the ESI, Wood, they had 16 monitoring wells. They had the transducers out, and basically showing the flow coming in from the west towards Van Etten Lake, flows into the lake there. And, you know, basically the AECOM that did it for the state, the transducer studies showing the same thing. This is what's referred to as a gaining stream because it flows in from both sides. And that just has backed up what USGS has said multiple times over several decades. So.
Before we go to break, can I ask a question to Beth based on this timeline study? So if this is how the Air Force is running, we're really not going to get a result to the ESI until May, June, July of next year, which means then the remedial investigation will then begin next summer. Is the state also looking to do nothing except study and investigate more to where we're not going to see any action from the state of Michigan, as much as we're not going to see a whole lot from the Air Force, except for the investigations and the money spent? I mean, there's actions being taken inside of investigation. And we've been investigating, I've been involved with this conversation for a couple of years, along with most people sitting at the table. So I guess what I'm asking is, what can we expect from our state people, not from the Air Force? They're on a different schedule than us, but the state definitely has responsibility inside of this as the regulatory
body,
Well,
okay?
sure, and if we're speaking of the base contamination here, it is really the,
See, I'm not talking about base contamination. I'm talking about our contaminated area inside of the communities with surface water and drinking water that have been affected based on what has happened here,
correct.
okay?
Right.
So, I know you're new in the position. You'll excuse my frustration and
I-
my passion, okay?
I can understand.
But we're in trouble here as a community. We have a contamination issue with our drinking water and our surface water, and we're looking for the Air Force to react to it faster than they can, and the state to tell us what their timelines are gonna be, so that we can count on actions taken from the state.
Well, sure, and the reason I asked if it was base contamination, which I know, I understand this is impacting your entire community, so I don't mean to be insensitive when I
You're
say
not,
that.
and-
My distinction is between, so we are also coming to talk to you on Friday, there's
Correct.
the Air Force-led studies, and then there's the state-led studies that are, and those studies are generally in areas that have not been linked to contamination from the base yet. I know in the beginning, when Bob Delaney was on this, there were several investigations that were done on base. We have that data. We don't feel that we need to collect any more data on the base right now. We have a general idea. The Air Force is following along in their CERCLA process. We're encouraging them to provide these reports. As Matt has said in the ESI, there will be some conclusions on interim actions, and so we'll be looking for that and evaluating that. We're I don't want to say pushing, but we really want to see that on those interim actions and the results of those conclusions. So we're hoping we'll see those come out soon, and then just because interim actions can happen anytime, along this, once this is complete. I mean, sure, there's priority in funding, but as, folks here have always said, anywhere in the CERCLA process, you can do an interim response.
But my question is, what timeline can we anticipate from the state as it relates to what we're looking at and talking about here for our community? I understand what Matt's position and the DOD's position is.
Correct.
They have a process to follow, okay?
Right.
And then
The process they want to follow.
the process they are following, okay?
Correct.
Which is a 4 to 6 year process. So if you follow the same line as the Air Force, then you're going to be on an environmental study investigation until June or July next year, until you begin a remediation investigation like they're going to do, and we're not going to see any action taken by any agency, and we're going to be in the same position, holding our tails between our legs.
Let me stop you there. I can appreciate your opinion here. But one thing that I think there's some confusion on, so the state is, we are reviewing the Air Force actions from base-related contamination. That is essentially my role, and that's what I am the project manager of. And I can understand this is your community, but these are being delegated to different people.
I don't
within
understand
the
what you
state.
mean by you're
So-
reviewing what's going on.
So anything the Air Force conducts, like the ESI, the reports they put out, the interim actions, that is definitely linked to base contamination. That is something that the state reviews. The Air Force is completing those actions and those reports. Mike Jury's group in our district, they are working on the contamination that is not related to,
Outside of the fence line.
right, basically, it's not related to the base contamination.
Correct.
So each of those areas, and those are kind of being separated by source areas. Each of those is kind of on its own track right now, and Mike and Andy are kind of the point people
Correct.
with that.
Okay.
Right, and so we can,
So what's your timeline, Beth, on doing stuff in the area not related to the Air Force?
not related to the Air Force. I'm going to have to rely a little bit here on our district staff to answer those questions, and we can try to,
Is that something that we could have answered, at a
No,
moment?
no.
Write
Well,
written down
I'm
and then
willing
answer?
to not have my break so that I can tell these people that there's something here we need to do. And you'll excuse my emotion in this, but it's not being related to us. It's the same damn message we heard last time. We're doing an investigation of a contamination
Jeff.
for 2 years.
Would something like this, for each of the locations that we're looking at, where it is state-led, would something like this, a timeline of kind of where we're at, be helpful for you?
Yeah, I'm looking
And
for a
helpful for the
timeline
community.
on what's gonna happen.
Okay, so we can prepare those. I mean, that's where I'll have to leave this, and we'll have to follow up
problem.
on it.
Okay.
You get where I'm coming from.
I certainly do.
Okay, fair
Okay,
enough.
thank you. We are running behind. We're going to take a break here. I think everybody needs to take a break. Should we shorten the 10 to 5 minutes?
And
Is that something you guys, everybody in favor? Okay, we're taking a 5-minute break. Please, be back here.
You know, that's the problem.
Well,
what do you think?
Anyone that wants
Because literally, I'm going to be walking out in 20 minutes.
Get back to our seats, please.
I feel like we might want to change this from dates to like at the end.
Okay, I'll get out of your way.
You're going to have to let me know if y'all do get that. That'll be good for this episode.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. Oh, yeah, which way now?
So down is
Back, oh, down is forward. Okay.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we have, co-chairs, are we ready to move forward? Matt, are you ready? Sure. Okay. Okay, next, we have a GSI study phase with Mr. Matt Baltusi.
Good evening. Due to time constraints, I'm going to kind of go through this pretty quickly, but I'll be around for discussions. And Beth, just let the report that I'm going to be talking about is posted on the Wordsmith website. Just a quick review. I gave a part one discussion of this topic on a portion of the base around Van Etten Lake in June. So I'm going to do, this is part two, and I'm going to be talking about areas along the southern part of the base from Mission Street, Three Pipes Drain, FTO2, and the wastewater treatment plant areas. This is, what I'll be referring to is groundwater data that was collected between 2011 and 2018, and groundwater, both by the Air Force and by Eagle. This map here shows the National Water Inventory of wetlands from 2005. It's off our Wetlands Viewer website. And this is important because in our how we evaluate, oh, back too much? Great, thanks. Okay. The wetlands are an issue when it comes to surface water. Okay, thank you. Because they are regulated and are, subject, they're waters of the state, I should say. And that's important because when I look at GSI, I look at, there's like a ridge that kind of follows along the upper part of this area above the wetlands and above the Au So you got the Au, which is right here. You've got Van Etten Creek. This is below the wetlands are below the base. So the groundwater flows from the base to the wetlands to the Au River. So this is Mission Street, and I'll just point out a couple things on this slide. The dots represent the groundwater data that was collected from temporary wells and permanent wells. The colors represent the concentrations that are above GSI and above GSI and below GSI of 12 for PFAS. So the evaluation I had to look at was just one of the chemicals. I understand there's other chemicals out here, but we're tracking those as well, but this was the evaluation that I was asked to do. This gray line here is just an area that I just designated, okay, what values of the groundwater data do we have near that line to help assess whether it's above or below GSI. It's arbitrary, okay? But the reason I selected it is I tried to select it so it's above the wetlands, because when you get down into the wetlands, the effect of the wetlands can alter the chemistry of the groundwater, and you have to study that almost separately. So I prefer to put a network of wells or look at wells as they come off the base before it enters the wetlands. There are impacts to the wetlands, but to assess it from a groundwater to surface water impact, I like to look at it from the groundwater side. The arrows represent an interpretation of the groundwater flow direction from the 2017 annual report. So groundwater flows basically in this direction at all these locations. And then lastly, and then I'll go on to the next slides, and they're just kind of a duplicate of this same layout. In this particular area, I selected additional wells that needed to be sampling because we don't have enough coverage there for a GSI evaluation for 3 pipes drain. This is FTO2, numerous locations above GSI. That's all the red dots. These also represent multiple sampling locations at the same location. So I only looked at, and just for presentation purposes, only decided to show what was at least one exceedance at each location. Again, the groundwater flow direction. This is the area, or the line, as I call it, the GSI line that I assigned to do my evaluation.
Now, these are all 2012 to 2018 data?
Yes.
So we can't tell looking at it which is which?
Correct. It's everything. I looked at it all together to do the assessment because different areas were assessed at different times. Good question. Thank you. This is the wastewater treatment plant area. Again, here's that gray line that I used, and these are the locations, again, indicating whether it's above or below our criteria. Surface water samples are oh, it's kind of twisted. I don't know what happened there, unfortunately. This is actually the Au Sable River. This is 3 pipes drain, and I guess Van Etten Creek is clipped off here for some reason. I don't know why. But anyway, there are detections of PFAS in 3 pipes drain. There's detections here in Au Sable River, and there's actually detection over here just south of the dam at Van Etten Creek. This is the marsh area, or as most people call Clark's Marsh, FTO2, wastewater treatment plant. The reason for just showing this slide is show the difference in the concentrations relative to the Au Sable River, the wetlands area, and of course, surface water area up here closer to the source. So closer to the source, higher the concentration.
Matt?
And that's it. Yes?
Matt?
Yes.
So how is dilution into the river for current surface water testing done to determine what's actually going into the surface water coming out of Clark's Marsh? Because Clark's Marsh is very hot, and then as you come down the river, the dilution factor is much greater, so we have less detection.
Yes.
But so it's all about dilution.
Yes.
So how are we actually knowing what's coming into the river and into the surface water and the bayous and everything else?
Right. Just looking at, this is the only data set
No,
that we
I got
have.
it, but
Yeah.
I just, so,
Well, if you'd have to study the actual wetlands itself in terms of the water within the wetland.
Is
Yes,
that happening?
exactly. Is it happening? We're in discussions to
So
talk
no
about
is the
doing that,
answer.
but, correct,
currently?
correct.
Okay.
Yep,
But Matt,
Yeah.
just to throw in,
yeah,
in your temperature data report that you released, Eagle released last meeting,
yes,
just upstream from Whirlpool, so it's the wastewater treatment plant plume, long stream, number 1 and 2, 4,600 parts per trillion in 2014, 4,600 parts per trillion PFOS coming out of that stream into the Sable River.
yes.
And that has never been mentioned. The Air Force, I'd like to know if the Air Force, how much sampling they've done in the wastewater treatment plant plume that goes between the plant and the Sable River. Because that is a hot zone, and that's been ignored by the Air Force as far as I can tell. I don't think they've done much of any sampling in that plume area in the last 8 years.
Correct. The data points on the previous slides that were from the groundwater were done by Eagle.
But Eagle has
Yes.
known since 2012-14 that that was a hot plume
Yes.
going into the river. Did they communicate that with the Air Force?
I don't know.
No, we cannot have that.
Okay.
That's something that we'll look at as the Air Force does the RI.
That's the
The Air
problem.
Force knew about what came off those drain beds in 2012.
Well, that's
I
coming
know that's
off the
before your time, but the Air Force did know about it in 2012.
And Matt, Eagle does share we do share our data back and forth.
Okay, thank you.
But no additional sampling has occurred since that data came out. It's been just put off because it's not drinking water related, but it is health related because of the do not eat the fish that started in 2013 in the Sable River. And that's the avoidance that has been allowed to go on at this site, contamination site.
So can we have an action item based on that, Beth? Can we have an action item based on that so that we can either start an investigation, do some kind of an action item regarding what Arnie was just speaking to?
So you start the ESI, the second phase of ESI,
So that's what we're looking for.
for the
That's what we're
Sable
looking for.
River.
So if we identify something that an action's not being taken, so we're gonna look at, is an action now going to be taken based on those kind of numbers? So that's all I'm saying is,
Okay.
Gotta
can we?
start sometime.
I understand.
Okay.
That's where I'll ask for an action.
Well, that's what he just did. He just asked for an
I
action
just asked for an action
on-
item regarding
For both agencies, is that
both
correct?
agencies.
Right.
Both the
agencies.
Sable and the wastewater treatment plant.
Can we stop having the emphasis on drinking water only?
Right.
All water becomes drinking water at some point. And everybody keeps saying the comments of, when they bring up Oscoda, and they're like, but how many wells do you really have affected? It's like, well, I have, according to the federal standards, 2 wells that are hot. But according to medical standards, I have 400 wells that are hot. So I need the Eagle and the Air Force to actually treat this as a holistic thing rather than piecemealing this.
Surface water is as important, if not more, than the drinking water. We're studying the drinking water really good. The surface water needs to be dealt with immediately.
Right, and the groundwater, because when I have a well that's considered within standards, it's good, we can ignore it because it's at 30 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS, but it tests 1,100 parts per trillion at PFHXS, that's a health problem.
And your P4, PFOS, MCL in April could very well be 8 and 14, not 70. And that's your cleanup number.
And so the state agencies, as Arnie mentioned, are going through the MCL process on a state level for additional compounds, including the PFHXS. So stay tuned on that for the state.
Thank you. Please move forward. Okay. That concludes our presentation. We do have some wrap business. I think, Arnie, do you have anything, or should we move on to membership?
Definitely, let's move forward.
Okay. We do have some, so for the RAB, we have members, and we have some new members. Brianne, do you want to touch on this real quick on the new?
We have two members that were previously alternates that have stepped into primary roles, and you wanted to highlight that right now.
Yes. You want me to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, if you could. Yes.
So Matt Hegwood had to resign last spring, and Catherine Larive, if you could, where are you, Catherine?
Right here.
Oh, there you are. I'm sorry. And she volunteered to move up from alternate to primary, and the two co-chairs discussed that a month or two ago. And so that's the process. So she's in the primary role. Joe Plunkey, I appreciate the service that he gave us for 2 years, and he has resigned and not renewed his 2-year term. So his alternate, Dan Stock, also requested to be primary, and the two co-chairs discussed that, and so he's on as the primary. So that fills our primary to 9 again. You want to go into the alternates? Or you gonna
I
separate?
think we just have, let's just go to the applicants and do a brief introduction.
Okay. Do you have, Matt?
For the new
They
applicant.
just want to stand up and introduce themselves real quick if they're present.
Okay, the new applicants, if you guys are, anybody's present, like to introduce yourself, give you a couple of moments. What's that?
I'm Dave Wynn, I'm the first applicant.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Rex Vaughn, new applicant, resident of the Cedar Lake area.
And stand up and speak up so everyone can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, Rex Vaughn. Sir.
Jeff Gottlieb, I'm a community member, and I live along Secure.
That's your process. I don't know, he's already approved it, so if you could say that. And is there any discussion from the RAB members?
I know I'm a local business owner, landowner, and community member of South.
Or Malcolm would do that.
Okay. Thank you and welcome.
I'll let Arnie lead some of the discussion real quick. Go.
Okay, I thought the Air Force was going to do this, but in the operating procedure, it says that the applicants are reviewed by the co-chairs, and then I had our community RAB members look at the application, and we invited them in to talk to us and tell us about themselves about a month and a half ago for those 4. And then it was submitted to Dr. Termath for review as a total list, just like 2 years ago in selection committee. And he reviewed those 4 and he approved them.
Yes.
Right? So right now, the operating procedure says we're bringing it before the whole RAB members, primary, for discussion and basically approval of those 4 to be brought in to the RAB.
So will the RAB then grow by 6 more community members?
They're filling alternate positions. After that, we had a couple more. Irene Dunn also did not continue her beyond her 2 years. And Dan O'Connor had dropped out last spring also. So after these 4, I believe it brings it up to, we're short 2.
So
Is
yeah,
that true?
the operating procedures call for a total of 18 community members, 9 primary and 9 alternate. And so right now, we have 9 primaries, we only have 2 alternates. There are 7 vacancies and 6 applicants. So that's
Right.
our nice little rundown. So there'll always be 9 community members at the table. It's just a matter of whether they're sitting in for somebody or they're a primary.
And the other wrinkle to it is Martha Gottlieb, who's been an alternate for 2 years, but unfortunately due to job requirements, she's not been able to attend meetings for the last 6 months or so. So I asked her to recruit someone, and she mentioned her husband's name. And so he put in an application. Martha's got to decide on whether or not she's going to continue. And so that's going to go into the account. So I think we have at least 2 vacancies for new people to apply. So there are 2 applicants that sent in. Scott Lingo also hasn't been mentioned. And here you are. Did you introduce yourself? I missed it. Okay, didn't hear you. Okay. So those have to be submitted to Dr. Termath, and then when we hear back from that, and actually, why can't we just throw that out for discussion? Or do we need to give you the applications for the full RAB to see them, to be able to see if we approve them? But I don't want to wait until the next RAB meeting. We need people working on this.
Was they provided before the meeting?
To the full RAB, I don't know, were they?
I forwarded them to you. We got 2 of the applicants within the last 2 weeks. They were forwarded, but I don't know that you've had any work sessions prior to that. They have been forwarded to Dr. Termath. We haven't heard anything. I don't anticipate there's going to be a problem with him approving those.
So what are you requesting, Arnie, from the board?
Well, I don't want to overstep the procedure, the operating procedures, and not give the community, the agency part of the RAB, who have not seen this, I don't believe, those 2. And, but we have talked about it in our community side, that these 2 would be good. So we're waiting for Dr. Termath.
Okay, so you're stalling. So what are you requesting?
From the
us to
perception
do?
of the community RAB members,
We're
the
okay.
people, we would like these people as alternates.
Okay.
Okay.
The 4 that introduced themselves, yes. Brex, David.
Let's
We can move forward on
You can?
6.
Okay,
Yes.
well, you didn't tell me earlier. Okay, do it.
Just go ahead.
Okay. All right.
All 6? Is that what
Yeah.
we're talking about? All
Yeah,
6?
let's move on
Perfect.
6.
Do we have to have a vote on it?
Yes.
It's a consensus type thing, isn't it?
Do we need a motion then to approve all 6?
Yeah.
So
Have a
Facilitator,
motion.
do it.
So I'll ask it a different way.
Only
What are you
community members
requesting us
vote.
to do with the 6 alternates for this board? From
Okay,
this
now
board?
she's telling me only the community members vote on this,
Yes,
and that
they'll
isn't
vote
how
on
I
the voting members.
thought it was going,
What
so.
is your process for doing the votes? Is it a motion like you'd asked?
Yeah, I think what we did before is all in favor.
Yeah.
Everybody in favor?
Yes,
Right.
all.
That's what's legal for you.
No, it's the Air Force guidance, so.
Okay, Malcolm?
Yes.
As our
All in favor?
facilitator, what's
Go
in
ahead.
the procedure manual to bring on 6 alternates to this board? What's in the procedures?
From the procedure, from what I recall, it's the community, it's up to the co-chairs,
Yes.
what I.
So that the
Okay,
resumes were
I
shared
can't
in
answer it.
advance.
So what does the procedure
There's
say?
discussion, which is
Okay.
kind of somewhat going on right now. And so this is everybody's opportunity to say, yes, I have an issue with this, or I don't. And then somebody says, okay, I move for a vote, all in favor. The community members in favor raise their hands, all opposed, community
Okay,
members.
then I will,
There we
if
go.
it's the community only, then, if that's what you're saying?
Yes, the only
Okay.
voting members of the.
Fine, fine.
So moved.
So moved, we have a motion, and it's seconded, that we have 6 new applications in for, and they're going to be filling alternate positions. Does the community members go down the list? Aye or nay? Do we have, how many say yes?
All in favor?
Of the community members? Okay, we got 6, 7. Okay, so, and nay? It's passed, the 6 are added into the RAB as community members.
Thank you. Okay, so, like I said, we're right at the finish mark.
They got it accomplished.
We have one public comment
At the end of the day.
so far that we've turned in. So we're gonna go ahead and take that one comment, and then we will. Yeah. Well, what's that? Can you speak? Well, you have to sign in and then fill in the card and hand it to us. It's just to keep the rule.
The card is so that if we have to follow up with you afterward, we have your information. That's all.
Well, they'll be able to, give their information.
Yes.
Okay. So, anybody that wants to speak.
Anybody wants to speak?
Yes, and they'll provide their information.
Yes, please just afterward, fill out a card and provide it to me.
Okay, so.
Get it to Brianna.
Right, in respect of everybody's time, please keep your comments and your questions to 3 minutes. And, how many people have comments so far, just so we're tracking? 1, we got 2, 3.
Comments or questions? What do you
Yes.
Comments or
Either
questions?
or.
I got one. I got a bunch.
Okay, that's under 3 minutes. Okay, sir?
Paul Rakowski, Ascota. Got 3 questions. One is to DQ, and it is that it's your former project manager claimed that the foam that was on Van Etten Lake was reconstituted AFFF. Is that still the opinion of the MDEQ? That when you see foam on Van Etten Lake, it's AFFF reconstituted?
We have a foam page on the MPART website, and I believe that could give you all the information on foam that you
Okay, so you don't have a particular opinion on the question? Okay, second question.
I'm going to step in and as co-chair and say, what's really done is, if it's suspicious, according to their website, then they take a sample of it and they analyze it, just like the Air Force did.
That's not
2
my
years ago.
question.
It
My
is.
questions
Do you
relate to
assume there was
AFFF.
they
Is it
sample
AFFF or not?
They sample it. If it's PFAS, it comes out high. If
Okay,
it's not,
I got my answer already, thank you. Okay, the second question is, now that Ascota Township has discovered 2 PFAS sources that are contributing to our water. One is the dump on the northeast end of Ascota or Van Etten Lake. It's got a plume that's dumping into Van Etten Lake. And the other one is the wastewater or sewage treatment plant that's dumping 250,000 gallons a day into Clark's Marsh with PFAS. That's like 78 parts per trillion. You guys been doing that for 365 days a year for 15 years. That's about 1.3 billion gallons of water you've put into Clark's Marsh with PFAS in it. What's the schedule for investigation? And are you going to come up with a citizens advisory committee like this here to allow the citizens to get information about your plumes and your cleanup plan and give feedback? That's my question.
You want me to answer that now, or?
2 minutes, go for it.
Up to you.
I didn't know if that was the process here, that I could directly answer questions to the public comments.
I mean, if he can,
can.
then that's your choice.
Well, you won't answer them at township meetings, so we might as well answer it here.
You can also follow up afterwards, your choice.
It's your choice.
All right. So at the dump site, it was found there was PFAS in there. Most of it, most of what was put in there was household items, but we're not entirely clear everything that was put in there. there may have been trash from the Air Force Base that was dumped into that site. So far, what's been found is that the any drinking water wells around that dump and any surface water around there has come back non-detect. And with the exception of one test at a surface water where it came back, I think at about 5 parts per trillion for one of the compounds. In the process that we're following with the DEQ, we've had a meeting with them. We've discussed the process, how we're going to move forward, what they expect of us, and we are in the process of seeking funding to be able to put in more test wells outside the boundaries of the dump to see the extent of that plume. Once we know the extent of the plume, then we will start working on what the remediation method to use is. Then for the wastewater treatment plant, that was an Air Force plant that the township just took over in 2001 to abandon the failing mechanical plant that they had over where the DPW is. It is extremely high in PFAS, but the Air Force operated that for a lot of years, and it was found that the Air Force was directly dumping AFFF into those drying beds, which was then flowing out into the marsh area. So the PFAS that is coming through the township system that's been found recently is about 78 parts per trillion. And we're beginning discussions with the DEQ again. We're beginning the process of testing to find out the source of that PFAS, whether it's coming from an industrial area, residential area, or something we don't know. The plan has been turned into the DEQ, and we're waiting for them to approve that plan. Once they do, then we'll begin extensive testing to narrow down the sources of that. Now, we do have some drinking water wells, properties have drinking water wells that also have a sewer system, and those drinking water wells are, of course, the water from that are being put into the sewer system. That could be a possible source, but we won't know until we do a lot more testing on it. Depending on the results of that will depend on what kind of system we need to install on that in order to reduce the amount of PFAS coming from that, because in no way do we want to be contributors to this. But just keep in mind, that system was operated for decades by the Air Force with direct dumping of AFFF, which the Air Force did try to make our responsibility, but when the documents were found from the DEQ that showed what they were doing, from what I've heard, they've given up on that endeavor.
And about the advisory committee, are you going to have one?
This type of advisory committee is a program that's established by the Air Force. Michigan municipalities do not have that kind of program. Whether we establish something or not, we don't know yet.
Okay.
We have to move on to the next question.
Well, I do have one more question, if you don't mind.
Time's up, sir.
If you give it to us.
He took up all my time.
Well, you asked him to answer it.
You want an answer?
You asked him. Submit it in writing.
Okay, here's the last question, real quick. You can answer it at your leisure. The DEQ claimed that water was going under Van Etten Lake. I think what you had said earlier, Beth, was that the DEQ now agrees with USGS that the PFAS is not going under Van Etten Lake. Is that correct?
Currently, Eagle has no evidence to suggest that the water is flowing beneath the lake.
They're going under the lake. It's not.
Where the data that we have
Just
from the
put
transducer
it in
study
writing.
is consistent with the
Thank you.
USGS.
Let me move forward.
All right, next, I think you were next, sir. Arthur? We have Mr. Arthur Woodson and Scott and one more. And we'll cut it for this evening. Remember, 3 minutes.
How you doing? I guess mine wouldn't be questions. I was invited up here from Flint by Kathy, and well, I want to talk to the audience because what I'm hearing today is the same thing that we hear in Flint. 4 years, we have been drinking on contaminated water, bathing, and I hate to offend you just by being here, but if we don't come together, they're going to keep on using you as a guinea pig and a study animal. ATSDR, Camp Lejeune, did a study of contaminated water, and it was because of the government. They studied him, and I was helping a veteran. He was diagnosed with leukemia 2 years after leaving Camp Lejeune, and they still fighting to this day for health benefits. And this is what the government does. They prolong, they study, they keep telling you over and over, we're gonna do it. Just like on this thing that they had up here. They put all the things together. You asked about the wetlands. They didn't tell you if it was from 2012 or if it hopped across the street or whatever in 2018. Where is it moving? How does it move? How does it, where's the funding? Why can't we start taking it up right now and make sure that it doesn't jump again? They using AECOM. AECOM worked in Flint. AECOM put in fake data. AECOM, instead of getting the service lines out, they went to places where there wasn't no service lines so that they can get extra money. I know this because I have the documentation. This is stuff, man, they keep on studying us. Until we come together and say enough is enough, they're going to keep on doing this. Flint, Detroit, Grand Rapids, Alpena, Oscoda, all these different places contaminated, and they're not doing anything. They're just talking us to death. They're going to wait until we die. That's it. And I hate to offend you by coming up here speaking on what I know. 5 years I have been fighting in the city of Flint to get help. And if you're offended by what I say, I am awfully sorry. But until we come together, it's not about Republican, it's not about Democrat, it's not about black, white, pink, blue, nothing else. Until we become one voice, we're not going to get anything accomplished. And that's facts. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Scott Lingo. I'm a realtor, a landowner, and a father. Started out in Oscoda in about 1968, had a cottage on Huron Street, moved to Vanetten Lake. We were there from 72 to 86. And life was good. We drank well water, 2-inch well, was in the hotter zone towards the railroad tracks. Around 1989, I moved up here. Graduated from Central Michigan University in hopes to get a teaching degree in the area. Didn't find that, but I did get into sales and met my beautiful wife. 1993, the base closed. That was a hard time for Oscoda, as it is today. Economically, we saw a lot of business close. We saw a lot of people leave the area, and I thought, well, you know, I'm going to stick it out. I'm going to try to make my life in the north. I'm going to raise my kids where I always wanted to be raised. And I didn't need a lot in life. I just wanted to raise my children in a beautiful place, a safe place where I felt that they could gain all the tools to succeed in life and go on and live prosperously somewhere within this beautiful United States. So the base closed in 93. 98, they started reuse. I worked at the Villages of Oscoda, helped sell the former homes at the Villages of Oscoda. And then we started hearing about TCE. Then we had the wells put in. TCE was moving around. That was scaring people from coming in and buying the base housing. Well, after the TCE, we had the housing crash. Well, about the time the housing crash hit Oscoda, Coletta laid off about 600 employees, and they went down. So Oscoda got another kick in the hind end. You know, it seems like these timelines that Mr. Moss, and this is my point that I'm getting to, we need these timelines. I'm now 53 years old, trying to make my life and get enough put away in retirement. I'm a realtor. I own Target Real Estate. I treat my people the best I can. I've got former clients in this room that I see. I've got people here that are from out of state, out of the area, fighting for our community, but yet we have no timeline. And it breaks my heart, this PFAS. I was raised on Vanetton Lake. You know what? I was making beards with Lauren Curley, whose mother was a teacher at our local elementary school, with foam in the late 1970s, and we thought it was funny. Well, come to find out it wasn't so funny. The joke's on me, because I'd spread it all over my face. And my kids probably would if we still lived on Vanetton Lake. My goal was to retire at Vanetton Lake. It's where I learned to sail, I learned to fish, I learned to water ski, I learned to swim. And it's just sad that I can't take clients and point them to that lake and teach their kids how to fish, ski, swim because of the contaminants that we are exposed to within that body of water. My favorite fishing spot was Vanetton Creek. Used to catch walleye there every spring during the migration. I went down there this year. There's a man that's probably 70 years old who I only saw at the dam. For 30-some years, we met there every opener of walleye season. Guess what? Went there this year, 8-foot fence all the way around the dam. Can't fish there. Talk about a guy's heart that was broken. But you know what we really need now? Is we need people to come to this area, young people, to start businesses, to bring their families. And how do we do that with all this negative publicity that we get from the free press, from the national news, from everywhere else? I beg of the Air Force to give us a timeline, get the ball rolling so that I can sell homes to people that are confident in this beautiful area that we call home. Thank you.
I have a couple questions and a comment from Matt. The first question, Matt, on the slide, when you're talking about the ESI and you were walking through the timeline, there was a reference to interim to IR measures, and it was IR drinking water that I saw on the slide. Does that mean that you're only going to look at interim remediation measures for drinking water only?
That was how the SSI started, that became the ESI. It was to look at the drinking water receptors, yes.
So,
what?
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was just saying, so does that mean you're not looking at doing interim measures to clean up the plumes that are contaminating Vanetton Lake?
That will still be looked at as part of the ESI.
But I'm
They
talking.
will look at that.
But why wasn't it on the slide?
Because on the west side of the lake, those are affecting drinking water
But why wasn't it
receptors.
on the slide then?
So, and that's something we probably should have clarified.
Okay.
But yes, along the west side of Van Etten Lake, there are the drinking water receptors because we sample about 19 homes in that area.
Okay, but what about the GSI violations?
And that will be looking at the GSI as they get into the RI phase.
So you're not going to look at at doing interim measures on the GSI violations?
It's with the drinking water.
So
with the
folks, we've just been sold a bill of goods here because the key things that need to be done here are we're going on our 5th advisory now. Okay, for fish, right? For foam, for deer, and another one's coming up. And so now there's no interim, we're not even looking at interim measures to deal with the plumes that are contaminating Van Etten Lake and the Ausable.
Clark's Marsh.
Right.
Ausable River, Lake Huron, from surface water. So when you're talking about surface water investigation.
This is definitely an action item. That
No, Arnie, this
between-
is
no,
a
no, I'm
conversation.
talking- no.
Are you saying
Put
that you're
in
not?
writing, just submit the question in writing.
Well,
we'll get it
but
addressed.
wait a second. We've
So-
been told that things were being sped up here. We saw a press release which seemed to be pretty deceptive, and now it seems to be even more so, because we're being told that the key exposure factors here aren't even going to be reviewed as part of the interim steps.
The interim measure, which hopefully the conclusions of the ESI, by putting those into place, ultimately will affect the GSI. Because once you put those into effect, the potential interim measures, say along F41, would potentially cut that off, which is getting to the Air Force Beach area. But we need to see what the ESI says. So in a roundabout way, yes, it will address that. As well as when we get to the RI, which has already been committed to, we'll be looking at the GSI. So,
Okay, thank you.
I'm not sure. Oh,
right. But submitted in writing.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. My next question, your predecessor in 2016 indicated that if Michigan were to adopt a drinking water standard that was applicable in a non-discriminatory fashion, that the Air Force would comply. Is that still the Air Force's position?
Submit that one in writing, because I think that goes back to a state regulation which was passed, but it was discriminatory, was that?
No.
But
This is
just submit it in
this is a
writing,
drinking water
since we're
standard.
out of time.
Okay, and just my last comment here is that we're going on five now health advisories. We have information that's not being shared. We have answers that are not clear. We have timelines that don't exist. Something is seriously wrong here. It's been a long, long time. There are people here more and more people coming to these meetings, more and more people who are fed up. And the credibility of both the Air Force and to a lesser extent the state it doesn't exist. We need to see action, and we need to see straight talk. It just isn't happening, and it's not acceptable.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time.
How about 1 minute? 3 questions in 1 minute.
3 questions.
Okay.
Submit them in writing.
I don't hear well, so I may have missed it. Was one of your treatment methods ion exchange? Because it's not an ion. Second question, has there a survey been done of the fire departments in the area, and have they gotten rid of their PFAS fire foaming? And then the third is this stain-resistant carpeting? If it is, we can all track a little PFAS outside.
What's your name, sir?
Put that in your notes.
Sir,
And your home.
what was your name?
You've got a sheet on them.
What do you want? This is Bear Claw. Sabo, that's me.
Okay, then we got you. Thank you very much.
I think.
Thank
Let's
you.
hear the answer.
This concludes our RAB meeting for this evening.
We just said, if you just can't commit to saying there's no PFAS, or there is,
Thank you very much.
then we're not gonna use it.
Good job. Meeting adjourned. Is this yours or mine?